I do want to let you know today this may be my last presentation on Israel here at the church. This may be my last presentation ever at this church. And you'll see why in just a moment. But anyway, we want to get started. Our key verse today is Malachi 4:2. It says, "The Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in its wings." And that's something that we can claim. But I want to start off today going back to Israel and going to the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea plays a prominent role in Genesis because we know it was the site of Sodom and Gomorrah. But right now, today, the Dead Sea has an elevation at water level, at shore level, of about 1,412 feet below sea level. It is the lowest land area on Earth. And because of that, it gives it some very unique characteristics. Also, the fact that it is a closed sea, and the fact that water comes into it, and yet water has no place to go out of it. It can't flow out. Now, the upper part of the Dead Sea, it's divided into two parts these days. And the upper part reaches depths of about 1,000 feet. So it is a very deep lake. And the lower part that you can see kind of down here in the bottom averages about 10 feet. And so the upper part is salty, but not as salty as the lower part. And the lower part has a salinity rate of about 34% compared to the ocean, which is about 8%. And I can promise you, when just a drop of that water gets on your lips, whew, it's not salty, it wakes you up. And so it is just amazing, that body of water, and it is unique in the world. Now, I wanted to show you this picture because since 1950, the water level in the Dead Sea has dropped over 130 feet. And you can kind of see the progression. This is 72, this is 1991, and then this is in 2011. And it's dropped even further since that picture has been taken. Matter of fact, now what they do, they have dug a canal from the upper part of the Dead Sea to the lower part of the Dead Sea, so they can literally pump water, and they have a pumping station that pumps the water out of the upper part so that it'll flow down into the lower part, so it can keep water in that lower part, because that is where they harvest the salt, is from that area. And you can see all of these lines. These are all kind of like salt terraces, and that's where they collect salt and produce that. So it's very interesting. But you can see there's just things that have been hidden because of the water level that are now showing up. Now, I will state this last year, they have had above average rain, and so the Jordan has been flowing more so than it has in past years, so possibly the water level of the Dead Sea will start to rise again. But when we were there were observations made of some greenery that actually there was enough rain even around the upper part of the Dead Sea that even that area was starting to turn green. And that's one of the prophecies in the Old Testament, that at the end times of the end days, even the Dead Sea will bloom at that time, which it did this last year for the first time that they know of, that it's been recorded. So that's kind of currently what's going on with the Dead Sea. It is a beautiful place. It is colorful. It is just as unique as it can be. And because it's so low, the air is just so still and calm. Maybe it was just the time that I'd been there both times, but it is unique. And to give you an idea of what we're talking about, from the Temple Mount to the edge shore of the Dead Sea is 14 miles. So like from driving from here to the Wilson Overpass going into Wichita Falls, you go from an elevation of about 3,500 feet to 1,400 feet. below sea level. So it is a dramatic, dramatic change. You go from an area that's got greenery and trees to an area that is almost desolate. So it is amazing. So this area is unique. Now, because of the salinity of that, you float. And you've seen that, you've heard that, you float on the water. And just to prove that, you can see here, this is the reason why I may not be doing any more of these presentations. But you would think maybe that Tammy is sitting up on the ground, but she's not. She is floating. But look how far her shoulders are above the water. But you can see, you float. You cannot, it takes effort to keep your feet underneath you because they want to flop back up to the surface. So it is a very strange experience. And it's also, what we think of hard water here, how we get kind of that slimy, slick feeling. Well, it's really slick. It's like having oil on your body when you get into that water. So hopefully I'll be back to do another program. We'll see if I live long enough to do that. All right, well, I wanted to show you these dots, and we're going to go back and kind of pick up where we left off from the looking at the stones of Israel. But I wanted to show you this picture. This is Google Earth today. This picture was taken in 2017. But look at how desolate this area really is when you look at it from a distance. And those red dots are places where Abraham, he started out in in Mesopotamia, over by what would be now lower Iraq or Kuwait area. And then he traveled all the way up to Haran, where they settled with his father, and his father died there. Then he came down to Canaan, then over to Egypt because they were having a drought, and left Egypt and came back over into Canaan. And all of this time, not only is he there, but Lot, his nephew, is there. Now, one thing that's interesting that the Jews teach and seems reasonable, we established last week that Abraham was the second son of his father, and but Lot was probably as much as 40 to 60 years older than Abraham. And so we think, when we say nephew, we think he's younger, but Lot was probably and most likely older because he was born from the first son of Abram's father. So kind of have a different picture when you think about Lot being the older, but because Abram was the direct heir from his father, he was the head of that family as they traveled into Canaan and Egypt and back forth. And so even though Lot was older, here's a younger man who's in charge of the movement. And the younger man is the one that God is speaking to. He doesn't speak to Lot. So interesting, you think about him leaving that area and leaving his family. That's where he grew up, and his family had been there. And then he's asked to leave and basically go to and get through the desert area. So this is where he would have ended up, in the land of Canaan. And so I want to take you to Genesis 13. We're going to read this. It says, "Is not the whole land before you? Let's part company." And this is Abraham speaking, or at the time Abram, because he and Lot have come back to Canaan, and they have so much wealth, so many animals, that their servants, their people who are taking care of their herds, are fighting among themselves. So Abraham says this, is not the whole land before you? Let's part. To the left, I will go to the right. If you go to the right, I will go to the left. And so Lot looked around and saw that the whole plain of Jordan towards Zorah was well watered, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. And this was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan and set out toward the east. The two men parted company. Abraham lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived among the cities of the plain and pitched his tents near Sodom. So here they are on this ridge, Abram and Lot, and they're looking it over the land, and Abram, even though he's the head, he gives the option to his older nephew. So which way do you want to go? You choose. Of course, Lot looks over at what then is the plain. Something that's maybe more like the Golan Heights is today. It does get plenty of water. It is so lush that they describe it as what the garden of the Lord, the Garden of Eden, would have looked like. So this is a lush place. Just imagine for a moment, you've got a lake out there that's fresh water, and then you've got the Jordan feeding all of this plain, and it is beautiful and lush. And Lot says, I'll go there. And so that's where he went. And then Abram chose the hilly, rugged area of Canaan, and probably what would be most people's second choice, as it was Lot's. Why go there? But God had a plan for that. So, as you recall, when we talked about the stones of Israel, there's a spot near the Gihon where a settlement was established, and that settlement, as we saw last time, contains what we have found just recently, and they have designated as being Jacob's stone. And it has changed a lot of the vision of what we see as the time of Isaac and Jacob. And so it's near the Gihon Springs, and there was a settlement there. And if you recall, that settlement, as it, blow it up there a little bit, is just above the Gihon Springs. And it's been there for an extremely long time, but they've isolated. There's some cave dwellings there, and they all date back to the time from sometime between the Tower of Babel all the way up through Jacob. And if you recall, this is what we call the Temple Zero, and this is what the city of David is proclaiming as the Temple Zero, which could have been the first altar or temple area that was used by the people who inhabited that area after the Tower of Babel. And you can see there it has a raised platform for an altar. The room 2 is where that raised stone is that they've isolated and located, and it's just a general area where they can prepare things for the altar. It has a grain press for the grain offerings. It has a wine or a olive press for the oil used in the sacrifices, and it's really a well-designed place. Now, one of the things, this is maybe what it looked like at that time when it was being used. Now, I didn't explain this when we talked about it, but it's something that is very interesting, because the archaeologists there have found the pottery and things of that area that was used, and it dates to sometime around the time of Babel, after that, all the way through the time of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then it's on from a little past that, but then at the time of David, King David, when David took over the Jebusite city and made that Jerusalem, there's no evidence that this place was used. Even though when you go to the city of David and today, and they will promote this as one of David's areas that he used to worship the Lord, but there's no hard evidence that it's used during that time. And then you go further up in time to the time of Hezekiah, and all of a sudden it's being used again. But there's no evidence during the sign of King David. So the city of David now says this is David's altar area, but there's no archaeological evidence that it was used there. It's blank. So why is that? We don't know. But the archaeologists that found this place is that we can't say that that's David's temple area, because there's no evidence that it was used during that time. So wanted to show you this chart because if you look at the timeline, you can see the black line there is the flood. And you can see there I've got, Methuselah, Noah, when he built that, and you have Shem that was born about 100 years before the flood occurred, and his other 2 brothers. And then you have the Tower of Babel. So this is of this time period. And if we look at Genesis 10:25, it says that 2 sons were born of Eber. One was named Peleg, because in this time the earth was divided. And if you look at that timeline, the Tower of Babel is right at the birth, or just before the birth of Peleg. And Peleg, at that time, the earth was divided, so they named him Peleg. His name in Hebrew means division. And so when that division took place at Babel, Peleg was born sometime right after that, and they named him Peleg, meaning division. And then I thought it was found, have you ever wondered where the term Hebrew comes from? We call them Hebrews, we call them Jews, but where did the Hebrews come from? Well, it came from the father of Peleg, whose name was Eber. And so Eber means on the yonder side, or to cross over. So he was named this when he was in Mesopotamia. Probably Arphaxad left after the Tower of Babel and went to Mesopotamia. So all of the relatives after Arphaxad were in the Mesopotamia area. And so it's interesting that Selah named his son Eber, which means to cross over, or the yonder side. What of the Hebrews, hundreds of years later, what was their objective? To cross over the what? The Jordan. And how has that become a symbol for us to cross over to the promised land? So called Hebrews, and the Hebrew people. Now, I found this interesting because Jews, the Jews who are taught the Torah and extra biblical things, they have documents, and this that date back 2,000 years ago, but other writings outside of the Bible that state that Abram lived with Noah and Shem for 36 years. Now, we don't have any biblical indication of that, other than we have this. Abraham entered into Canaan about this time. And so if you look at it, when you start Abraham's life when he was first born, look at all of his ancestry that he was able to know all the way back to the time of Noah. Noah was alive when Abram was born. Noah was alive when Abram came to the land of Canaan. So the question is, the Jews think that Abram did reside with Noah and Shem for a period of time. And then you look at the time that Abraham was alive afterwards, after he got to Canaan. Shem is still alive. Matter of fact, and so you see Eber, there's Eber, his, what was that, great grandfather, outlived him. Even outlived Abraham. So you can see that Abraham could have had a wealth of information from his ancestors all the way back to Noah. And so if you look at this a little differently and go all the way down, look at Jacob. Look who was alive when Jacob was alive. Eber was alive. Shem was alive. Jacob could have known Shem. Now this puts, to me, a whole new perspective on this verse. Genesis 47, it says, "Then Joseph brought his father Jacob in and presented him before Pharaoh. After Jacob blessed Pharaoh, Pharaoh asked him, say, 'Sir, how old are you?' And Jacob said to Pharaoh, 'All the years of my pilgrimage are 130. My years have been few and difficult, and they do not equal the years of the pilgrimage of my fathers.'" He knew his fathers. There's a good chance that he knew Shem and Eber, and those people were still alive when he was. So kind of a different play on that verse, that he did understand the pilgrimage of his ancient fathers. So I wanted to show you this because I never had thought of this. But if you look at Adam, when Adam was born, Lamech, who died before the flood and was Adam's great-great-great-great-great-grandson, Lamech was alive and knew Adam. He would have known the first man. He would have been able to hear the stories that Adam had to tell. And then Shem knew Lamech. And he would have been able to hear those stories that maybe Adam had told to Lamech. And then if you look at Isaac and Jacob, they would have been able to speak to Shem and hear the stories that are just two people back from the original source. So we wonder how all of this information can be so recorded is because, people like Jacob knew this and he passed this along to his 12 sons. And that's why we have all this information about the creation of the world. We think of all these generations when we look at the timeline and we think, man, a lot of information may have been lost from generation to generation. But we're only talking 3 generations of having contact with these people. So I wanted to show you this. This looks wild and crazy. It's nothing more than a grouping. Put it this way. You've heard of 23andMe, Ancestry.com, where you can send in your blood sample. They'll do your DNA and they can tell you what race, nationality, ethnic background you have. Well, we have not been able to do this since about 1990 is when all of this started, and we developed the DNA genetic genome of the entire human DNA early 2000. And so there was a study that was done that looked at thousands of people who they collected DNA from 1996 all the way up to 2008, all over the world with different groups of people, so that they could see if they could trace back their DNA back in history. Well, we haven't really been able to do that very well. We could only go back, when you do something like Ancestry.com, that DNA testing or 23andMe only goes back about maybe 3 to 4 generations, and that's it. To go back from that takes a little more time and expertise. But they're able to do that now. And something that has just come up just in the last 5 years is tracing this genetic information all the way back to a group of 3 core DNA sites or DNA information. Isn't that interesting? They can't go back any further than that. Just 3. Probably the sons and the wives, the daughter-in-laws of Noah. This is as far back as it goes. After that, they can't find anything. And this is really puzzling those people who believe in the theory of evolution, because they have no place to put the monkey. You see? Before they used to put the monkey in there and they had the timelines and they just drew all of this stuff out. I can't, because it ends at this cluster of 3. So let's go from here and come back to Genesis for a moment. And this is where we kind of left off, where Abram had met Abimelech when he came back from rescuing Lot. But the king of Sodom said to Abram, "Give me the people, and you keep all the goods for yourself." But Abram said to the king of Sodom, "With raised hand I have sworn an oath to the Lord God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, that I will accept nothing belonging to you, not even a thread or a strap or a sandal, so that you will never be able to say, 'I made Abram rich.'" See, Abram didn't want anything from the wicked area of Sodom. He knew what that area was like. And he said, "I don't want anything from you." And that's something that we have to think about when we do our daily work. Do we get things from people that maybe have a strange lifestyle or things like that? Are we getting rich off of those people? I think Adam kind of set the standard there. He says, no, I don't want you to do that. Don't want you to, I'm not even going to associate with you. So after this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Now this is after Lot had already chosen and was already in the plain of the Jordan. He was living there. And Abram has this fear that he's now got all of this wealth and he's kind of a foreigner in the land of Canaan. And people there that may want to take what he has since he's not originally from there. So, he does have a little bit of fear there. And so it says, after this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. He says, do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward. But Abram said, Sovereign Lord, what can you give me, since I remain childless? And the one who will inherit my estate is Eleazar of Damascus, which was one of his servants. It was his head servant. And if Abram died, everything would go to Eleazar. And Abram said, you have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir. Then the word of the Lord came to him. This man will not be your heir, but a son, who is your own flesh and blood, will be your heir. And he took him outside, said, look up at the sky, count the stars, if indeed you can count them. Then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. Abram believed the Lord, and he credited it to Abram as righteousness. And he also said to him, I am the Lord, who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to take possession of it. But Abram said, Sovereign Lord, how can I know that I will gain possession of it? Abram believed the Lord. Oh, did I not click? There we go. So the Lord said to him, bring me a heifer, a goat, and a ram, with each 3 years old, along with a dove and a young pigeon. Abraham brought all these things to him, cut them into two, and arranged the halves opposite each other. The birds, however, he did not cut in half. And we talked about this 2 or 3 years ago, about how this process took place. But we go on. It says, then birds of prey came down on the carcasses, but Adam drove them away. As the sun was setting, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a thick and dreadful darkness came over him. Now, there's a lot of different commentaries about these verses, but I ran across one that I thought was very insightful, and it gives this area, because we have to believe that everything that's in the Old Testament speaks of or gives us types or shadows of Jesus Christ, right? Everything does. But how does this? And so this commentary I thought was very unique, and it gives us a different idea of what Jews may believe these verses say. And has to do with this. Back in verse 4, verse 5, it says, God took him outside and said, look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. Now, to us, that would mean what? There's just so many, you can't count them all. But later on, it went out and it says, at the end of the day, this whole narrative takes place in a day. What if God had asked Abram to come outside and it's daytime? And he said, look up at the sky. Count the stars. If you can you? Count. That's how many your descendants are going to be. What would Abraham do? What would you do? How many stars can you see in the sky in the daytime? How many? Incorrect. You can see one. Our sun. Our sun you can see. But Abraham doesn't know that's a star at this time, probably. They're not thinking that. He just, I can't see any. So, he said, so shall your descendants be. Who was one of his descendants? He was the father, an ancestor of Jesus Christ. So if he was taken outside during the day and asked to count them, it may make some sense that we see this verse at the very last chapter of the Old Testament. The very last Hebrew language writing that there is in the Old Testament. And it says this, "Surely the day is coming, it will burn like a furnace. All the arrogant and every evildoer will be stubble. And the day that is coming will set them on fire, says the Lord Almighty. Not a root or a branch will be left to them. But for you, who revere my name, the Sun of Righteousness will rise with healing in its rays. And you will go out and frolic like well-fed calves." You notice it doesn't say S-O-N. It says the Sun of Righteousness will rise with healing on its rays. Isaiah 60 says this, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you. See, darkness covers the earth, thick darkness is over the peoples, but the Lord raises upon you, and his glory appears over you. Nations will come to your light, and kings will be drawn to the brightness of your dawn." Isaiah is describing the Sun of Righteousness. And so we are assured when we believe in that Sun that has that healing power that we will be able to do exactly what Malachi 2 says. We will be able to frolic like well-fed calves. Have you seen well-fed calves frolic? Benny? And when they're well-fed, they're pretty happy, aren't they? And that's the way we'll be. So, a little bit different take on a verse. Thank you. Any questions, comments? Besides you, no comments from you?